all for coming and joining us today. I think we need to start with roll call for the committee, so we can get that on record for a moment. Sure. Sorry. Our secretary is not with us today, so. Hey, what?
Your microphone is not turned on.
Oh.
It's the. There you go. Just push it up. No? Yeah, on there. Oh, like this.
I just put a microphone. Oh, there it's on.
Ready?
Awesome. You're ready.
Mr. Gadowski?
Present.
Ms. Goldstein?
Here.
Ms. Anderson?
Here.
Mr. Lucero?
Here.
Mr. Huseman? Ms. Van Blaricom? Ms. Chancho?
Here.
Ms. Boyce?
Here.
Ms. Ramos?
Here.
Ms. Lovato?
Here.
Ms. Molina? Ms. Rivas?
Here.
Ms. Kim?
Great, thank you. Next on the agenda was the approval of the November 15th, 2022 minutes. I would like to ask that we hold off on that until our next meeting. I shared our minutes with our lovely AG person here, Sue, and we had some revisions, so we'll present those to the committee along with the minutes for this meeting at our next meeting. Next on the agenda was just I wanted to get the committee's feedback in the state order. We were asked to keep the commissioner apprised, and so I just wanted to make sure it was okay with you all that I shared the minutes with her following the meeting, but now we'll postpone that until we get them approved at the next meeting. Next, we have certification of committee members. Just a quick note, I invite Sue to give an update. We just wanted to let you all know that there was an update with that.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good afternoon, committee. As you may recall from the November meeting, you all authorized the formal certification of committee members and elected officers of the committee, and that was accomplished through the committee secretary, Van Blaricom, and provided to the commissioner. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Next on the agenda is agenda setting process. Just wanted to have a discussion with you all because I know this is a little odd that the way that I've always done it is I work with our vice president and our secretary to set the agenda. And because we're a state organized committee, no more than one, we can only meet with ourselves. I can't even call one of you up to discuss it. So just wanted to talk through that process and see if you all had any ideas. I'm open to sharing an idea that Sue and I had discussed, but we just need to find a way to be able to set future agendas in the correct manner.
So I think if we can determine what our charge is exactly and what our end goal is, then we can work backwards and plan how we want to get there.
I agree. I think for we're going to talk about that a bit later, so I'm happy to move this down the line on the agenda. But right now, I think if we could solicit ideas, like if you guys think of something in between meetings, sorry, Ramona, to put something else on your plate. But right now, we're really centralizing a lot of the supports through Adams 14. Since this is an ad hoc committee, we don't really have resources to be spending. So our idea was that we funnel them through Adams 14. Like we noticed the meeting today on our board docs. So we can continue to do that. We could share the link and allow each district to post that way. We just have to walk through some of this, but I agree with Ms. Goldstein. I think we probably need to talk about our charge and what we're doing before we put the cart before the horse, as they say.
How far in advance,
Yes.
how far in advance will we be posting the agendas?
I think by law, it's 24 hours. Ideally, I would like to get them posted. Once we could set our meeting calendar, then we'll be able to do that a lot more in advance than this
Talking
time.
about the timing, about when people pose agenda items so that they're timely, so they can make the agenda.
Yes, yes. I think we almost have to backwards map because we need to set some deadlines. I think that the next one regarding the posting notice, we can also circle back to if you guys are all okay with that after we hear a little more about our charge and what the process is going to look like. I think 2.4, the selection of a facilitator or project manager. I did invite our staff here because, again, we are relying on a lot of Adams 14 support. We do, I believe we have about $100,000 grants that we had talked about through CDE to support the work of the committee. And so we wanted to walk through a couple of things. Primarily, I have been meeting with our group here, and we feel like we need a project manager, not so much a facilitator. I mean, we've all participated in meetings. We all know how to facilitate a meeting and work through a meeting. But I feel like we need somebody to walk through what this project is going to entail, who's going to be responsible for it, and then hopefully select a writer as well, because we're going to have to bring all this information together to coordinate the plan that we develop as a committee. So with that, I'll introduce Mario Marquez. He's our Chief Business Officer for Adams 14, and he uses Monday.com. It's a project management software, so I invited him just to show us, give us a little preview of what that might look like. Oh, yeah.
While the technology is getting set up, I'm wondering if we can close the loop on the designation of posting and maybe to use the Adams 14 board doc site as the official place of posting. We'll just do a sidebar. Sorry.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Or whenever.
Okay. I think if we circle back to it, yeah.
All right. Good afternoon, Madam President, members of the committee. As you may know, part of the transformation that you see in Adams 14, in some cases, a lot of the transformation has to do with the introduction of project management approaches and project management techniques. So to that effect, we had adopted the use of Monday.com, which is the state-of-the-art platform today, top of the line for project management. So in this system, we're able to see who is going to be supposed to be doing what, when, in some cases, how. And if we were to have to produce an organization plan as called for in the Colorado Laws 2022, that would be something of enough complexity to warrant the use of something like Monday.com. So I'm going to show you the basic framework here. If you were to take what is in the School Laws 2022 for the Section 223114 requirements of a plan of organization, and then translate that into Monday.com language, so to speak, you would see that there are 4 sections in there. You see them color-coded, 1, 2, 3, 4, which this would involve 11, 12, 13, 15 tasks just on the conservative angle of this. Each one of those could then be subdivided into subtasks or subprojects. If you were to take the first portion, then you can see here all the tasks that the section in the school laws call for. As you can see here to the right, the system is very flexible, allowing us to designate for each one of those tasks who would be the team leader, team members, the status of the task, timeline, duration, what is that task dependent on, planned effort, the actual effort spent, so forth, and we can track any number of variables on that one project. This system does things automatically that are beyond the capabilities of the regular spreadsheets like Excel or Google Sheet, definitely beyond what email can do for project management. Let's say, for example, in here, that we were to set the status of these tasks, and we see that 3 of them are finished, and 2 of them are in progress, and 1 of them is still not started. The system automatically would generate the status reports of this project, so we could go to the project dashboard and then see exactly here what is going on, and we could click into any of these tasks and then see the detail behind it. So this is a system that produces automatic reports. For the person that is going to be the project manager in charge of this is a gift because this system requires very little chasing and definitely takes the project off the email and onto an integrated system which also has a communication feature in it. So let's say that throughout the project, conversations need to be had on each one of these things, but we don't want to have that on email. There's a communication feature in here, and you can see there, start conversation, where the people that are involved in that task can have their chat. So everything that is related to that one task is contained there, and we will not be to be hunting for things in the email. That is one of the most powerful features of this. It can be linked to virtually any app. It can be linked to email. It can be linked to presentations, so that everything is contained here. There's several views. Some people like to look at things in terms of a dashboard like this. Some people like to look at it in terms of a Gantt chart. Some people like to look at it things like this. These are different system, Kanban or cards. And so this is, in our opinion, a system that provides the computing power necessary to design and control and execute a project of this magnitude.
Thank you, Mr. Marquez. I have a few questions, but I would like to open the floor if you have questions about this program or how it works. Or one question I have is, oh, sorry, go ahead. I saw it in the corner of my head.
Since you're currently using the system on projects?
Yes, ma'am. We have several projects of very high complexity. One of them is what we call option 5B, which was voted by the board on the 14th of February, which is the decision to merge Hanson Elementary with Monaco Elementary, to merge the 2 middle schools in about 5 years, and then a series of components that involve virtually every school and every department in the district. So we're using this to manage that and other projects in operations.
In your use of it, have you seen any limitations or problems with it?
None yet whatsoever.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. Great questions. Mine are more functional because I've used Smartsheet, and this is very similar. Does this allow external users, like would we as a committee be able to see this and the attachments or anything else that's in it?
Yes, ma'am. The system allows for the creation of both private projects that only the creator can see, or public projects that everybody can see. And we as district employees, we can grant view access to people on the outside.
Great. Awesome. That kind of leads me into, we kind of merged 2.4 into 2.5 on the agenda. I apologize. there is somewhat of a sense of urgency. I don't know if you've all heard that the Commissioner of Education, Katie Anthos, is retiring or resigning. So she's only going to be there through June, and I think it's imperative for our committee to try to get something to her soon, which unfortunately soon means like in a couple of months, which really tightens our timeline. So I just wanted to put that out there, let you guys ask questions, add comments. I think if we're willing to dig in, we're absolutely going to need a project manager. We're absolutely going to need outside help, because as a committee, we should be making decisions, not necessarily going out, digging up all this information. I don't know, like we're going to have to go through a project plan like this and talk as a group of what information would be helpful for us to complete each section of what's in statute that's required for the plan to present to the commissioner.
Ms. Lovato, turn this thing on.
How many years? I think I might be on here.
All right, I think
Yeah.
I'm on here. So I'll just start by saying this Monday.com program seems very impressive and a nice tool. That said, I wonder, I'll just speak personally about whether we need that type of tool and how much time and energy and effort do we want to place into those kinds of next steps in the process. I'll just submit my own personal belief that reorganization is not a politically feasible solution, even if you felt like it was something that would help improve educational outcomes for students in Adams 14. For a whole lot of reasons, I just don't think it's viable. I've had a number of folks approach me during my tenure in this role in my community who have some interest from time to time in creating a Broomfield school district, because right now Broomfield's divided between 6 different school districts, largely Boulder Valley and Adams 12. And each time they have a conversation with me and they do any exploration about all the mechanics and logistics, they quickly say this is not a feasible solution. So I guess what I'm humbly submitting is that we not waste time and effort if others share that sort of sentiment about the feasibility of reorganization. I'd rather not invest lots of money, whether it's the states or Adams 14s or otherwise, in that process, and not extend the committee's duration needlessly. I'm very much willing to serve in a supportive role in whatever ways are helpful to Adams 14 in improving educational opportunities and outcomes for students. I believe that is true of the other neighboring districts, but I'd rather put my time and energy there than in going through the mechanics of a feudal process, which is what I believe to be true about reorganization. So I just wanted to get that out there and see what discussion that may prompt.
Thank you. I 100% second that. Every bit you said. I mean, you have the experience in attempting something like this. Here in Adams 14, we don't, and I hate to waste everybody's time to have to go through a process that we have to either statute or otherwise. So I open the floor for discussion, questions. We have Sue here, if we could maybe direct some questions about the law side of things. Because again, this is our first time for everybody, and I am not familiar with our options.
So 27J has experienced many of the same issues with the different municipalities and people considering separation, and we understand the difficulty of the reorganization and all of the challenges. What is the charge of the committee and what is the expectation? What is the charge of the committee and what is the expectation from whoever charged the committee and called the committee? Because I don't know if what Chris said is whether that's our decision or not our decision. What is our charge? And included in our charge is there that option within the charge to say we don't believe it to be feasible, reasonable, whatever the case is. Is that within our charge?
Yes, please. I don't hope that.
Board Member Lucero, let me respond in 2 ways. One is, I think the duty of the committee, as I read it, is primarily to conduct a study and make a written recommendation as to reorganization, whatever form it may take. I don't see any constraints on the possibilities or like choose from a specific list. You all are the experts in the logistics of the school districts, and so I think a lot of the expertise of this committee will come to bear on that process. I'd also note in terms of, I think the bigger question that you're asking is what is the charge and what are our options? Madam Chair has asked me to do a brief presentation on certain of the steps that are evident in the law, and then we'll have an opportunity to talk in executive session for any attorney-client conference about legal options. But I do recommend that a certain portion of this discussion be reserved for executive session. I think it is something uniquely private to the committee's discussion about its legal options, just as any other legal question could be. And that way there's the confidence of the conversation. This is all very much, it's all for a public purpose, but the specific conversation as to options, I think, is absolutely appropriate for attorney-client privileged conversation in executive session. But overall, I would say the statute, in all of the words used, basically requires the committee to conduct a study and to propose a written plan. And then the public input and the rest of it that follows, but those are the two firsts. Did I address that adequately for now?
No, perfect.
So as a committee, do you all want to review the committee responsibilities and charge first and then move to executive session and then maybe come back to talk about all the nuances if that's where we decide to go? Okay, perfect. Ms. Keek, yeah, I think that was your section, sorry.
That's quite all
Just skip it all over and you're not ready.
This is right. Just cue me when.
But yeah, I agree. I think we,
I'm wondering, though, if, just because of the format of the room, do you mind if I take my laptop to the
Oh, no.
podium and do a projection?
yeah, whatever
Okay,
works best.
thank you.
Oh,
Are
sorry.
you, is this too much of a, how about here? Let me just, thank you. This is for informational purposes committee, so please stop me at every point that you have anything of interest that you would like to talk about, and let's pause and make sure that we cover the information that is useful to the committee. So I'll take a second to set up here.
I was just trying to figure out if there was a way to deal with this kind of interference thing, and I wondered if I was contributing to that. So I'm fine. Okay.
Yeah, you are not.
Okay.
We need to rewire the room.
Okay. Then I'm good to go. Thank you.
Sorry, you're probably right under our heater / air conditioner, whatever that is. I don't know where that noise comes from.
All right, let's see. Would any board member like to, or sorry, committee member like to move while we're getting this set up? Because there's plenty of other space here. All right. Okay, so on the screen for you, both screens for you, is just some general information. 1 second here. Let me try this one more time. Oops.
You could try presenter mode.
I'm sorry, could you, where is that?
Let me take a look over your shoulder here.
Okay, I was gonna do this here. All right, I've got a microphone that is blinking. Alrighty. I pulled together some general information. I don't know how much of it is new or how much of it is old, so please cue me about what will be useful to the committee and you as a committee member. So let's see how this goes. I wanted to start with the overarching purposes. As already mentioned, there are many, many steps involved with this reorganization planning process. But the basic purpose here is defined by our General Assembly. It's for all of the good things about education and a free and uniform system of education, general improvement, equalization of benefits, et cetera, et cetera. But I provide this as sort of just the aim and the overarching. There are lots of details involved, but this is essentially what it boils down to as declared by our legislature. As cued by committee member Lucero's question already, the two basic tasks in my view is conducting a study of the school district organization. You all have representatives from affected school districts. So all of you are the experts in this area, and that is why this committee is being called upon to develop a plan for reorganization. There's a lot of stuff on the screen here, but it's only to note that this information is available online, and I'm borrowing it here. But that handout I have for you to have in person as well. But in there is a list of the many steps, which I think you've already identified as being multiple and multifaceted. And we'll go into some of those in detail. But I do want to highlight that there is already this publication that's available online in English and in Spanish. And this is essentially what it looks like. It's a 3-pager and potentially useful, especially as you start going into the communities and talking with your affected populations and community members, students, parents, and the like. But essentially, trying to focus on really the next steps that you could write down. It's really to establish the parameters of the study, to say if the charge from the legislature and the state board is to see what information is relevant, there's a long list that goes with the study, but is really to establish how much information will be useful to you as a committee and as committee members to inform your recommendation for the plan. So the establishment of parameters for this study, including timeliness, as Madam Chair was pointing out, those are going to be pretty critical. The public school systems within, again, it's already been established as shown in the membership of the committee members here, and developing that plan of organization. This is going to get a little bit more cluttered here as we go, but just again, keeping in mind a little bit of the process bit by bit. Interestingly, the legislature has said in its law that the school district boards of education are required to cooperate with this committee. So as you all sit here, you and your constituent boards will all be working together to a certain degree for the plan of organization. And one of the key features of this committee, in my view, is the fact that it not only has committee members drawn from those affected school districts, but is really channeling that expertise and input as committee members here, but also to reach back out into the communities and to receive the input from those affected areas. So it's really, in my view, an interesting position in that regard. We don't see that very often so specific in the law. But essentially, from the beginning of the process to the end, as already mentioned by multiple board members today, there are a number of steps, but the point is to, if there is a remapping of school districts, to go all the way through the end and to give the committee the responsibility to both start and finish the process through the voter approval, if needed, to remap any district boundaries. So next, here's where again it gets a little bit busy looking, but I would just note that if we're looking at the multiple steps, it's really 11 steps. We can go into those in a little bit more detail, but it does look like a lot here, and it is. But I'll just note again, there's in the committee's favor, because it is basically by law entitled to the cooperation of the school districts. Hopefully that is one thing that can aid the work of the committee. Again, before we jump into detail here, another resource online, I just wanted to show the visual of it here. We have the links provided, and Ms. Lewis has them as well. But because this document already exists, I thought I'd use this to just step through a couple of steps here with you. But before we dive in, how are we doing so far, committee members? Okay? All right. So drawing from that first line, thank goodness it's color-coded, so the teal line on the top is really focused on these initial steps internal to this committee. We talked about the importance of having community input, but these first steps are all the committee. Whether it chooses a facilitator or project manager or whatever, this is basically the burden shouldered by the committee here before involving the public. And I've checked off the parts that have already occurred. And you get another third check mark on the first committee meeting held, but still to be decided are the process, timeline, and scope. There are some legal timelines that are required, and we'll get into that, but the committee itself, as mentioned by Madam Chair, has some discretion in terms of its internal benchmarks for getting things done in the list of things to be done. So moving on here. As I view it, the next line in that helpful visual is really about reaching out. And that is to say, once the committee has conducted its study, completed its study, it will have a tentative plan. It's basically a first draft to say, this is our recommendation. The steps involved are to send it to the commissioner and also to each of the local school boards. And that's when the committee process starts reaching out into the community on a very, I would say, to be scheduled basis, but the process for it entails these public hearings. A public meeting much like this with some additional components of hearing from interested members in the community. And the law, as I read it, is going to envision and require a separate public hearing for each of the affected districts. So if your home district is Adams 12, that would be a meeting specifically to obtain the input from that affected district and on through each of the affected districts. So that's that line of the chart. And I guess here's where trying to tie into Madam Chair's concern about timeliness. One of the key timelines here is once the committee has conducted each of its public hearings, by the time it's through with the list of public hearings, that last one, the final public hearing, is what triggers a 120-day time frame for the final plan of organization between the committee and the commissioner. That means there's going to be back and forth in a structured way that the General Assembly has given you. And there are some mini benchmarks in between, but essentially 120 days. So for those of you keeping track, if on day one you have, going back up again here real quick, the process, timeline, and scope, and you have a tentative plan noted here, filed with Commissioner. If you call that day one, you add the 15 days to get the public hearings to begin. If you have them all on one day, then it's a single day, and then you add these 120 days, and then you're about 4.5 months down the road. But I think, as has already been mentioned, there are multiple steps to get to the tentative plan and multiple steps to actually conduct the hearing and the like. But 4.5 months is the rough measure of what these steps up to this point would look like. So that's the final plan. And then the next bit is really the follow-up. If there's the redrawing of boundaries, there needs to be a special election, and that the legislature has given to this committee to shepherd through as well. So that is the beginning and end of the process. I had some other notes to discuss with you in executive session, but I'll pause here. If you would like to revisit any of these now, I'm happy to do that. We can also do that if you have specific questions, legal options, that kind of thing later on, if executive session is something that you're interested in having as well. Madam Chair, shall I close my slides, or would you like to?
Committee members, do you have questions, or do you feel they're more appropriate to ask in executive session, or we can move to executive session? Okay, I think that's where we're at. I would like to move that we move to executive session for the purpose of 24-6-402-43A2, CRS legal advice. May I have a second?
Actually, could I jump in here real quick?
Yes.
Just for open meetings compliance, if I can just clarify that here at 12:58 p.m. on March 10th, during the meeting of Adams 14 Planning Committee, that there's been a motion to enter into executive session pursuant to 24-6-402 sub 3 sub a sub 2 of the Colorado Revised Statutes for the purpose of conferring with legal counsel and receiving advice on specific legal questions and issues related to committee and committee member responsibilities, legal options, and processes under the School District Organization Act. Did that sound like your intention?
Yep.
So if that's the motion, back to you, Madam Chair.
Okay. Do we need to do roll call, or can I just get everybody in favor say aye?
So I think you might need a second, and I'd like to have some discussion before you call the vote.
Oh, yes.
So I plan to vote no on this motion. My belief is that an executive session would only be necessary or appropriate if we wanted to maintain attorney-client privilege about anything we discuss. And I have no interest in having a privileged conversation with legal counsel, given what's at stake. In the interest of all of our communities, I think any discussions with legal counsel can and should proceed in a public manner without executive session, and so I plan to vote no on the motion.
Okay. That's a great point. All right. Any further discussion? I think that being said, if it's okay if we do roll call so we can determine if this is best, or
Yeah, I think so.
Did you seek a second, perhaps?
yeah, Ms. Goldstein. seconded.
Oh, sorry.
Yes, I would like to retract as well. I completely agree. I think, given this is the first time, I don't think we're seeking legal advice. I mean, we are, but I think it should be public. It's about the future of the district and the work of this committee. So I retract that, and I guess I open up the floor for conversation about the presentation that was just given.
Before moving on, can I just note one thing?
Of course.
Because of the committee and committee member responsibilities, we were going to cover a little bit of the open meetings and open records law as well. If at a later time we could cover that, as well as the legal question that you had posed from last time on behalf of the members. So I just wanted to put a pin in that.
So Chairperson Lovato,
yes.
just speaking for myself, I would welcome any discussion about open records and Sunshine Act compliance in a public manner from legal counsel. I don't think that legal advice from legal counsel has to occur only in executive session. And so speaking for myself, I would welcome that kind of guidance here today, as well as I think we can still proceed with all of probably what people had hoped to deal with in executive session, but just do it in a public manner with legal counsel today.
I agree. Yeah. So I think right now I would like to open it up for discussion about the process as a whole, and then I think we could dig into the way the committee works. Since we're already meeting in a public forum, the Open Records Act, I don't know, it's up to the committee. Do you want to continue to learn more, or do you want to start digging into what was proposed earlier and get some questions answered?
All right, I will not be a hog of this whole meeting.
No, I appreciate it.
But just a few things on my mind. I guess I'm curious more about what the study phase requires and how broad it needs to be. For me, the piece, as I referenced before, that often makes reorganization unfeasible as a practical matter relates to money and employment issues. And so, for example, I would expect in a study phase that we would see that the total program mill levies between the various districts vary, and that the mill levy override amounts and the bond redemption levies vary even more significantly. And so dealing with those different tax rates and who's responsible for paying debt that Adams 14 may have, if it's to join another district or to be divided amongst a number of others, I think poses a real challenge. But I'd be happy to get more formal study and information that shows what the tax rates are, what the remaining debts are of each district, what assets they have, because who pays the debt and who gets the assets in a reorganization is often a critically important piece. So I'd have interest in that. I also suspect that there are some significant differences in master agreement provisions across the districts. At least in our district, we have a certified master agreement and a classified one. And trying to reconcile those differences in a reorganization, I think, often proves difficult, frankly, practically impossible. So having more information about how those salary schedules may differ and the terms and provisions of employment differ would be something that, if there is a study requirement, I would recommend that we start with that, and then hopefully be able to bring our experience and insights to bear upon whether doing more steps in a plan development process and public meetings and a vote is really necessary. I'll just say, as I look around the table, I see individuals like Mr. Lucero, who I believe has lived most, if not all, of his life within the Brighton community. Ms. Chancho, who's lived most, if not all, of her life in Mapleton or serving Mapleton. The same is true of me. And I would hope that if we see fairly early on some big disconnects in terms of feasibility of a plan ever receiving voter approval, that we can bring those kinds of practical insights to bear and say, let's not waste the time and resources of folks in that exercise, and instead invest our efforts in whatever ways we can support leadership in the community of Adams 14 to best serve their kids. So I guess that's a long-winded way to say how in-depth and how broad does our study need to be, because for me, I think it starts and frankly ends with money and employment provisions.
Thank you. I think that's where my question was. I wrote a note in one of the first slides that the committee decides the process, timeline, and scope. So I'm wondering if we can run through this list of what did you say, 11 or 12, and determine like how we need to answer them. Like if there are some areas that we can look deeper, like Chris just noted, or if we can just say we know, given our experience, this is absolutely not feasible. We're not going to waste our time. Like, do we have that ability to not necessarily pick and choose, but narrow the scope of this study as a committee?
Excuse me, the statute speaks about you must do every one of these things, right?
Okay.
That's what the statute says. So I think it portends two paths. One path is to jump into building the plan, which is a lengthy process. It's something that's not going to be done in months. It would take a considerable amount of time. Or consider another path whereby there's conversation with the state board and the commissioner around the practicality of going through the process. Because to go through the process would be burdensome. We've started this path several times, 27J, and it's just, it's difficult. I'm not saying it's impossible, because nothing's impossible, but it's difficult.
Thank you. My wondering is, if we're looking at timeline and scope as part of our agreement, right, our responsibility, and we just heard you recognize, Ms. Kim, that the expertise is around the table, can we then, if our timeline is like today, if we say today, we're going to determine the scope, which might include negotiated agreements, salary schedules, tax base, we have that at our fingertips. We're going to be able to determine that right away. That then would potentially lead to a conclusion that this is not a feasible practice, and so that would conclude our study. Is that something we could say, that our scope is this and the timeline is today, to then be able to move forward?
It seems to me that if you're coming to the final product, well, the tentative product, the first written product of the committee being a written plan of organization, that if it cites the data and the sources and covers, because the statute says must, each of these 11 points, I don't think it specifies, what kind of source, what kind of resource. So if you establish as the parameters of the study, each of these 11 points, in my opinion, that would be satisfied. How thoroughly you address each of those, I think, is not specified by law. If you're saying from a feasibility standpoint, your primary concerns based on experience that the sticking points are this limited list, that the study and plan is centered around those things, I think that would satisfy the law. I'm a little unclear on how a written plan would include the specific data. If it's all sort of at your fingertips and on the tip of your tongues, I think that's one thing. But, getting from the discussion of the parameters of the study to the actual written recommendation, I think maybe I'd like to hear a little bit more about how that would happen. But from a legal perspective, I think that sounds, it's not precluded by law.
So, Ms. Kim, could you comment upon the suggestion that Mr. Lucero made, which maybe the way I would frame it is, before doing a study, committing anything to writing, one option could be for representatives of the committee to approach the state board at an upcoming meeting and say, we feel like extensive study and development of a plan is not a good use of time, that it's likely as a practical matter not to land in a plan or in a plan that would receive approval, and might see if the state board is willing to excuse us from the responsibility of doing any more work in that space.
Well, I do think that communication is key. The law absolutely talks about all sorts of points of input and collaboration. At this point, in my view, trying to think this through, it's the state board that activated this committee, and it is the commissioner with whom this committee is basically tied in this process. So committee, through this law, is required to conduct the study, inform the commissioner and the school districts, get the public input, and then go back and forth with the commissioner for final approval, any revisions and the like. So in terms of the audience, it seems to me that step one might be the commission, who has encouraged collaboration, which is, in terms of the state board's involvement and permission, I would need a bit more time to look at that more closely. But I think more communication is better in general. And then in terms of a request, I do think you are an entity. If you move to do it as a body, I think that would be fine. My concern, especially because of Chair Lovato's putting a point on the is it end of June timeframe, is that by pausing, is there maybe a parallel track that you could take so that if the answer is somehow no, or you still have to do this, or you want to have that at least a portion of the study underway, so that you can come up with at least a partial tentative plan, even if it is to say no reorganization. I just wonder on the committee's behalf how best to channel your resources. Time is precious. The time of the committee members is precious. But by choosing a course of the communication and at the expense of, or instead of, taking at least these initial steps towards a tentative plan, as Board Member Chancho has addressed. So I'm not sure I'm exactly answering your question, but looks like you've got a side.
I have another question too. Could we, as a committee, invite the commissioner to come and meet with us and say, these are the initial steps that we've looked at, which would include the tax information, the salary schedules, and as a committee, we've decided we would like to request that you ask the board to reconsider their order, something like that. So we show some information, but we're not digging in and wasting time. Because I think, to Mr. Gudowski's point, there's information out there. You guys have gone through this experience where if that's the road we're going, then why continue to meet and hit every one of these points?
And Ms. Lovato, your comments are similar to what I had in mind. I just feel like there's benefit in having communication with the commissioner as quickly as possible. And I think she knows if we have timeframes around June that we might otherwise need to target, I would hope and expect that either the commissioner would join us in person in the not too distant future to say, before we have to flex into this process of developing an 11-step plan, we'd like to share our issues and concerns and see if she might advocate to the state board or take whatever steps she feels appropriate to excuse us from doing that. So we could either meet with her in person or perhaps have somebody from the committee on behalf of the committee correspond with her and present those points. But I'd much rather just get some communication going with her sooner rather than later, and not necessarily on the dual track pathway that was suggested, so that we can economize everybody's time. Because I know it's a busy season with budget development and hiring and a whole lot of other things. And so I'd prefer not to invest the resources of Adams 12 and myself in a path of futility if there's something, a different pathway that could be agreed upon by the commissioner or the state board that's more likely to be helpful in serving the community of Adams 14. And I say all that, I take my responsibilities as a member of this committee seriously, I'm here proceeding in good faith. I believe there are opportunities for the Adams 14 system to better serve students in the community, and I'm happy to lean in ways that are helpful. I just continue to believe that reorg is not the path forward, and the less amount of time and money that we invest in that would be my preference.
As a committee member who doesn't have experience in education, but I am an engineer and I do have experience in root cause analysis and things like that. I guess my question is, why should I trust what you're saying about reorganization not being an option? I guess I would like to see some information supporting that assertion. And I'm not talking about a huge study or something like that, but something more than just, I've had experience, this doesn't work.
Yeah, the best I can do as we sit here is to share that I served as legal counsel for more than 40 school districts in Colorado for a period of about 15 years before moving to Adams 12 as legal counsel and serving as superintendent. And during that course of time, I can think of 3 to 5 school districts who had interest in looking at either consolidation or deconsolidation. And only on one of those occasions in the Ray Idalia deconsolidation where things successfully move forward. Quickly in those other situations, and I don't know that I can share more specifics without having some attorney-client privilege concerns, but in the others, folks quickly felt like the differences in tax rate and allocation of assets that I referenced before were going to make it impossible to move forward with a plan that would ever receive voter approval from both communities. In the Broomfield situation, I was approached, I've been approached 2 or 3 times during my tenure, including by members of the Broomfield City Council, who had strong interest in creating a single school district to serve the city and county of Broomfield. And after sharing with them the statutes and these issues about disparate taxes, which are acute in a place like Boulder Valley and Adams 12, where Boulder Valley's total mill levies are probably somewhere in the 40s or 50s, and ours is close to 70 historically. As they've looked at that, they've quickly felt like moving forward with any further study or development of a plan would not be a productive use of time. So I don't know that I'd ever get to a spot of being any more specific than I've been now, but that's some of my experience that makes me believe that given what I know about the disparate tax rates, the disparate property bases between all the various school districts assembled here today, I believe on that past experience that there's not a feasible path forward to doing a reorg plan.
Maybe the approach could be to go down dual pathways, seek out communication with the commissioner, and at the same time start the study related to item G, which includes the things that Superintendent Godowski was talking about. So open up lines of communication with the commissioner and start the study as it relates to item G, the things you were going to talk to, which might help to convince other members of the committee whether it's feasible or not. So 2 paths, open up a conversation with the commissioner and do that basic work simultaneously, because we can approach A through K however we choose to approach it. Let's just start with G, which is all of those cash and organizational kind of things, right? So that'd be a suggestion that I would make, move in that direction first, and if we find out that there's things we can't overcome in G, that might have some persuasion about how we proceed.
Because it is our role to do scope, right? It's our role to determine the scope, is that what I understood? And does the scope include all 11 steps, or those just say considerations, right?
So
That doesn't say requirements.
technically, and I'm going to rely on board members' Lucero's good memory here, the actual plan itself is required to include these elements. I believe the board has discretion in terms of scope, in terms of how far back in years or how does appear that because of some deep and involved experience with this process in the past, identifying those sticking points with limited resources, identifying those as being addressed first, I think that that is totally fine. But I don't know if that's in place of any of the other items on the list, if that addresses your question.
Could that decision, once it gets to G and beyond, could that then be the request to end the study? If we do these sections that we then, as a committee, determine that this prevents us from really moving any further, it's almost, it would be kind of ridiculous to study the areas once we have a sticking point with G.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, Committee Member Chacho, it's if in the written plan, this tentative plan, this written product that you're
Yes.
looking at, is to say, we've studied this one issue in detail and have identified some impossible or unfeasible, whatever words you will choose, and therefore the rest of these components have not been studied.
Correct.
All I know is the words used in the statute. It seems you would at least need to identify, yes, we recognize these multiple elements. Here's where we see the decisive factor, which leads to our recommendation. I do think, though, in terms of potentially exploring Committee Member Lucero's dual track notion, that prioritizing those without necessarily precluding the need to further study each of those and defining the scope of what information you need, again, goes back to timing and how much you're trying to accomplish in each of these occasions that you have to discuss it with your fellow committee members, whether the commissioner is here or not.
And can I ask Claudia, if we were to look deeply at one area like well, it's actually three areas because it's our agreements and our contracts and our salary schedules and our tax bases, would that satisfy your interest in assuring the root cause would really prevent us? Would that be deep enough for you?
So subsection G contains all of that stuff.
Right.
Liabilities, obligations, debt retirement, all of those kinds of things, right? I think if we started with G and maintained the open conversation, I don't think anybody's actually gone through the process of doing that analysis at any time full bore for just the items in G, right? We can start with G. Start with G, do that work, see where we end up. See, and the feasibility of this whole section of the statute really lives in subsection G of that section.
I have a question for clarification. When you're talking about G, are we talking about equitable adjustments, distribution of property assets?
And that includes bonded indebtedness, liabilities, general liabilities and obligations of the district, which would speak to, I believe, things like contractual agreements. So there's a whole list of those items in G.
I just want to make sure that's what.
I don't want to, throw a monkey wrench into the works, but not even but, period. I am coming at this, like I said, I don't know about this. I don't want to stall this process. But for example, when we're talking about scope and process, to me, part of that discussion should also be what has already been done. what has already been tried, and I think that speaks to what you're saying too, Mr. Godowski, where it's like, okay, this solution has been tried in other locations, and for these various reasons, it didn't work. And I'm completely good with that, with a little more detail behind it. But I'm also curious, on Adams 14's part, what has been done in the past several years. I don't think that we want to be trying things and doing things that have already been tried and have already been done and have not worked. So to me, it's almost like we need a little background information.
I kind of feel like that's two different things. This focus of this committee, it's my understanding, is to decide whether or not we want to reorganize based on all these things. And in the meantime, Adams 14 is doing things to get back on track. And maybe the presentation that I was made available to some of us on Tuesday should be part of the focus of this committee too, to tell the people who weren't there, what is Adams 14 doing? Because I was very impressed on Tuesday.
So I don't want this to be misconstrued, right? I don't think it is the scope of this committee to determine whether or not it should be reorganized. The state board has put that for us to build the plan, right? D5 talks about for us to understand what works and what's not working in 14, right? That's one subsection of it. But I'd love to be corrected. We either have to build a plan or find another way out of this, right? That's the way I read the statute, right? We either have to build a plan of reorganization or find we're charged to build a plan of reorganization. Somebody tell me I'm wrong, because that's what I'm hearing.
Well, yes or no. I think from my perspective, I don't know how to put it lightly. I think the decision by the state board to organize this committee was effectively to dissolve Adams 14. I think we're charged to determine the best steps forward, and that doesn't necessarily, I mean, when you read through this, it's basically, I don't know if any of you have gone through a reorganization in any company. This is what you do. You dissect the assets. You dissect how to distribute them in a fair way, even if it's a merger or some sort, which is another option for this organization plan. But I think to the committee's point, what I'm hearing is this is so much. Like this has never been done. It's going to probably take at least a year or two. I know, like, we've probably each had conversations in each district to look at having this go to the vote, period. We're talking like $500,000, millions probably. Like, we don't know because we haven't done this. And, like, this is the first time I've dug through it to even hear about the different hearings that we're supposed to have. I didn't even know we were supposed to do that. So I think for me, since this is the first time doing this, and I think we almost do need to do a dual track. But I can't see us as a committee going through all of this before coming to that point, before coming to that decision. Like, I think we do need to have a conversation with the commissioners because the state board has changed as well. I think the vote to go into reorganization was 4-3. I could be wrong. But it could look different now. So do we do that dual track and ask the board or through the commissioner to say, hey, we've looked at Part G to start, and this is where we're at, and we'd like you to reconsider before we move on to the others? Like, maybe if we narrow down the scope to say those three things, this is where we started to look at G, not necessarily go through the entire portion of G, because you're right, that's kind of the bulk of it is how, what are the assets and how do we distribute them? I don't know. I don't see how we could get through all 11 sections of this in time to come up with any sort of plan to present to the commissioner before she leaves.
I don't think, to move it forward, I would suggest that we move forward with section G, do that work, and once the committee sees that work, determine the next step based on what comes back in G, and to move this off dead center, I'll make that in the form of a motion, that we begin this process by starting item G, and let's get that information out there. I don't know that anybody in the state's ever undergone this. Has anybody in the state ever gone through this reorganization process?
Not that
I think Westminster did, but it was not this to a T because that's what effectively changed this portion of the accountability law.
So to move it off dead center, I'd make a motion that the committee moves forward with beginning to compile the items identified in item G, and set a timeline for that work, and then moving forward based on the findings in that subsection G. That's the motion, so.
So, Mr. Lucero, just to clarify your motion, I do think it'd be helpful to have a timeline, so maybe we say April 1st or whatever time that you might, for me it'll be helpful to know a time by which we want to complete this item G analysis. I'd also like to know, I think it would be helpful for us to designate who's going to do that. If it's going to be Adams 14 staff, is it going to be each of the superintendents for these districts will direct their staff to cooperate and have somebody be the lead. But I think just in terms of getting it done, it will be helpful to know who's in charge, who's responsible, and exactly when we want it to be done.
I don't believe there's any hope in having it done by April 1st. I think that task in and by itself would be a 60 to 90 day. So if you want that added to the motion, I would suggest to return with information regarding item G by, what is this, March 15th, by mid-June? Mid-May? Excuse me, mid-May?
So, all of this, am I on?
Yeah.
All of this in the end has huge tax implications for all of our communities. No matter if we come up with a perfect plan, no matter if we take 2 years to really get into the numbers and really figure this out and everyone walks away with happy, I don't see a scenario where taxpayers are going to approve taking on the debt and assets of another district. And I'm curious how we can create the argument of, or if it's appropriate to make the argument of like, this is a waste of taxpayers' money to pursue that route when they aren't going to approve it in the first place.
I agree with that. I also think G is a little too ambiguous. For me, I think it starts with the tax. I know here in Culver City, and I believe in some areas of Brighton, there's been a real push for metro districts, which complicates things even further. So I would be more inclined to second a motion that really narrows that scope of G to say maybe we start with the tax levies. Maybe we do need to look at the certified and classified agreements and salary schedules and narrow it to 3 or 4 things that we can present.
I would also include, like, several of us have also just gone through the levies and bond initiatives, and to go back to our taxpayers right away again, I just don't see it happening. It's a lot to put on them.
Hopefully I'm not. I have my mask up, but.
To Chair Lovato's point too, and knowing that the commissioner is only going to be here till June, I could see doing G to an extent, but I don't see what the problem is with asking her to go to the board to retract the order, because, as you said, the board is a total different makeup now, the state board. And if you don't ask, you're not going to know. She could say yes or she could say no.
And in that case, so if I kind of summarize this in one line, as it stands now, we as a committee are required to come up with a plan to reorganize Adams 14. Is that correct?
Yes.
And you would want to ask the board
to rescind their order to reorganize. And then, I guess my question then, in response, Ms. Kim, to Claudia's question, is our charge to reorganize, or is it our charge to decide if it's feasible to reorganize?
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful question. If I'm understanding this plan, the charge of the committee is to conduct the study to inform a recommended plan to the commissioner. Whether it's to dissolve, not reorganize, I don't know what the other words are, but it seems to me that in terms of the steps and the product, inviting the commissioner in is totally discretionary. I think it's within your power, consistent with communicating with the commissioner. The statutory process contemplates that the back and forth of revisions with the commissioner happen after the public hearings. So if you were to stick to the basic flow of the law, it would be study, recommended plan as a tentative plan, community input, back and forth with the commissioner. It sounds like this committee is very interested in having also informal discussions with the commissioner, which I think is fun, and permissible and all of that stuff. In terms of the scope of the committee, this committee is a separate body. It can have a position on the order. I would need to look more closely at what kind of request other than simply asking. But part of the purpose of the committee is to bring all of these points of view together. So I think it is a unique forum. I think there's nothing that prevents the committee from inviting the commissioner at any time to a discussion. But back to the point of how to prioritize the committee's tasks, the order of these components, and given the timeline that Madam Chair has set out, I think you'll have to pick. You may not have to choose one, but I would say if you're choosing a focused request, a focused study, and a focused conversation, that's fine. But I will note that my representation of this committee on issues outside of this plan, outside of this process, is probably going to need to consult with each of your districts too, because you're here as constituent members of your school boards, obviously, but I'm only here for you as a committee, as a single body. So, I want to clarify that too.
Before we would make the assertion, and I don't ever want to be viewed as being the advocate for reorganization, right? Before we would ever assert that it's unfeasible, we ought to have some evidence, right? And I think the evidence lives in G, right? And to just move forward and say it's a waste of taxpayers' money without having done that work kind of betrays the intent I think all the legislation is probably off kilter, but that's not our job, right? That's not our job. But if we came in with evidence and just said, these 4, 5, or 6 items, and I'm okay limiting the scope of the study of G, and for these reasons, we believe that it's unreasonable and unfeasible to come up with a successful plan, then we have a basis other than just some political positions that we may espouse around this. So I just want us to get to do something here.
Another thought, like there's a lot of hard data we can easily access in G. The superintendents on the committee can attest to that, I think. If anything, if we can't address any of those considerations on the board through G, can we rely on the expertise of the committee to fulfill the other considerations in that plan of that study?
Shall I take this one?
Yes, please.
If I can loop that back to, if I'm understanding what you're saying, the law doesn't specify the kind of data. I think you, as the folks who live and breathe school district business, will know what you use and what you want to rely on as a committee. And you want to know, I think you have some sort of threshold, like this would be persuasive to me. This is what I need to know to make up my mind. And therefore, this is the type of information, the scope of information that the entire committee needs to come to a decision. If I can also just link this to Committee Member Lucero's point and others about feasibility, in my view, and I think this was Committee Member Chacho's one of her points as well, which is feasibility is not on the list. It can be a factor that informs your recommendation. So in my view, a written plan would say, having considered these things, especially these things, and noting that these items make it not feasible or whatever the case may be, based on whatever data, whatever experience, here is our recommendation. I think that's the flow, and you all fill in the blanks. There's a lot of steps, a lot of words, just a lot of complexity that I'm now learning about. But I think that's the basic format of what you would present as like the one sentence conclusion about the committee. Fill in whatever blanks you want with however many items, with whatever data, but like under the list of this is what we considered on this element, this is what we think about it. It informs our recommendation in this way. Whether you do it factor by factor or zero in on one factor and say, we think this pretty much makes up our mind regardless of what the other considerations are.
So Superintendent Gudowski, you talked about bonded indebtedness, mill levy override levies, and negotiated agreements with your certified and classified groups. If we limited our study to just that, because we're going to find that we have multiple agreements and multiple obligations based on agreements we're currently involved in. If we limited our study to those 3 items, at least the initial phases of that study,
I think as you described that, I would be on board. Maybe with the clarification, I think just looking at how much outstanding debt each of the districts has would be an important piece for us to do.
so bonded indebtedness, MLO levies, negotiated agreements, and outstanding debt.
I don't know how to word it in or if it's even part of statute, but as you know, Adams 14 is in a very, we're the first in many reasons, but one of them is we paid over $9.5 million to MGT. So I would like to somehow include legal in there, and I don't know how to limit that, but I think that in itself is a big thing. Because that's could impact our assets and our indebtedness.
So expand that to negotiated agreements, including, what is the nature of that agreement?
External management, maybe we just say that,
It's
just
our
that,
legal liabilities. Is
Yeah,
it just
there you go.
Everything we're legally liable to.
like on
Address?
current things. Yeah.
There's a lot, negotiated agreements or salary schedules, that's part of our legal liabilities and the contracts we've entered,
Yeah.
right? I have to ask my attorney. I don't know, I'm not an attorney.
I think this kind of thinking channeled through the commissioner, ultimately the state board and through the legislature may end up having wide-ranging impacts on this particular section of the statute. And so let's start building the case about whether this is even it occupies, I printed it off, it occupies a lot of paper, right? So if we could come to agreement on a scope, an initial scope that includes the things we've all talked about, at least we can move this forward.
I think too, isn't this a statute for districts who all agree that they want to try to consolidate versus being forced to?
The statute includes the state being able to do this.
But it's two separate parts.
Can I take that one?
Yeah.
This is something that I remember reading about, so let me see if I can find it. The scope is essentially for all organization, new districts, districts under a special section. This is the root of the community's question about this section 29, right? Who decide for themselves with another district. I did prepare a writing for you under attorney-client privilege that I'm happy to distribute that has a little bit more of my view on it. And we can do that without executive session if you just want me to distribute it to the board, the committee members here. But the act itself, based on my reading, contemplates an organization planning committee whenever there is any change in school district boundaries. There is a special case consideration for districts who decide to dissolve on their own and have already figured out with neighboring districts how that's going to work. And then there's everybody else who gets an organization planning committee or a reorganization planning committee. But it's basically the baseline expectation under the law that this is the process that happens whenever there's a change. And a very small exception, based on my reading, of the special case ones where they have a short process.
To move this a little bit forward, how would we get all of that information? I'm assuming like each CFO from each district would probably have to meet, which again takes more time from our districts. But how would we first obtain those agreements and the information, and then analyze it or compare it? Like, is that the charge of the committee to have to do that, or would we ask a representative of the group of CFOs to present that information to us? Like, how would we synthesize that info?
Ms. Lovato, given your comments and some of what I've heard, I may just articulate a proposed motion that kind of builds on what Mr. Lucero was saying. So I would move that the committee invite superintendents of the participating districts, Adams 14, Adams 12, 27J, and Mapleton Public Schools, to have their superintendents through their chief financial officers as appropriate on or before April 15 of 2023, provide information to the chair of the committee for dissemination to the full committee, identifying the comparative total program mill levies, mill levy override levies, bond redemption levies, a reporting of outstanding bonded indebtedness and when it will be paid or when it's due to be paid off, and other information about the legal liabilities and obligations of each of the districts. And that secondarily, that the committee authorize the chairperson to reach out to the Commissioner of Education to invite dialogue with the committee about this information promptly after the April 15th date.
Second.
Good job.
All of that.
All that.
Great. Awesome.
Point of at 1:32, committee member.
I'll rescind my motion.
I did not
Nope.
recall the status, so it's withdrawn.
That's fine.
Okay.
Way more articulately seated.
Ramona, may I ask for a roll call?
Mr. Godowski? Mr. Godowski? Ms. Goldstein?
Aye.
Ms. Goldstein? Ms. Anderson?
Aye.
Ms. Anderson? Mr. Lucero? Mr. Lucero?
Aye.
Ms. Chancho? Ms. Chancho? Ms. Boyce?
Aye.
Ms. Boyce? Ms. Ramos?
Aye.
Ms. Ramos? Ms. Lovato? Ms. Lovato? Ms. Rivas?
Aye.
Ms. Rivas?
All right. Passes unanimously. I will reach out to the commissioner.
Can I just?
I have to get on her calendar now, of course.
It was a rather long list. I'm gonna have you,
I can kiss into
That's why we recorded. Okay.
Yeah, don't ask me to do it again. Well, there's no way we can.
It's on record.
Yeah.
I had to ask. So.
Yeah.
All right.
All right. Well, with that, I'm a little hesitant to cover calendar review because we're kind of waiting for next steps. So I will definitely reach out and follow up once I have some dates with the commissioner, and we have our deadline of April 15th, so shortly thereafter, which might work well as well. And I'm pulling my experience from working CDE after State Board Week is always better. Let's see, given that, let me see what else is on our agenda, sorry. Do we need to direct you to share the information, the memo that you would send to the committee publicly? Could I do so now? Oh,
This
so
is
we
just
don't
for
have
the
to-
committee members.
Yeah.
This was in follow-up to the November meeting's request. And I'll just pass it this way because that looks more promising in terms of committee members. It's a 3-page memo, and if there's any discussion about it, I think that's fine. But long and the short, it had to do with the specific process, a shortened process under the statutory provision 2230-129, and essentially, Madam Vice Chair, I think your question already covered what that's for. And so, Madam Chair, if you want some time for the committee members to review it, that's fine. But attached to it are the 2 flyers that were mentioned earlier with the timeline on the very back of that packet. I would just ask that you treat the memo confidentially. If there are any questions, I'm not sure how you would like to handle that, Madam Chair.
Yeah, I would love for us to dig into more of what you had proposed that we cover during executive session, because I know there's, for me anyway, there's confusion as to what I can bring back to my legal counsel for Adams 14, what needs to live here in the committee. Like, I think if we could talk a little bit about that, that would be helpful.
I think even just looking around the table is a perfect example of why this gets a little tricky. Because some of you sit on boards together, others of you have other reasons to interact, and that's just a unique feature of this body. So I think, given that, if you have questions based on your home district, based on something you're doing with your school board, that's them. That's you and them. That's not me or here. So if there is a way to just identify or even visualize the conversation that you want to have with your committee members on something that you would either vote about, move on, decide, discuss, it's really, I think, the measure of please save that for the publicly noticed meeting so that each committee member has the benefit of that discussion and also the public. I think that's the baseline in terms of how to discern committee business. There is so much overlap, not just in people, but topics. Your school boards can do whatever they want in terms of taking positions about this, that, or the other thing. That is not my charge to advise you on. My scope is to look at this committee and how to aid in your decisions and how you want to move forward. So that, in a nutshell, is how I view my role. I do want to note a couple of open meetings law. Again, because this is a public process, it's for a public purpose. Because so many of you are tied probably innately to school boards, this is a little different for a lot of reasons, even just looking around the room. But all the things you know about open meetings law basically apply. Let me just identify one difference, as Madam Chair identified before, because it's a state public body and it's more than one locality is a state public body. And so a meeting is 2 or more committee members. So hence it's a little awkward, but the mechanism that Madam Chair referred to is I think what I've seen work with other state agencies, which is if there's a way to just channel your, hey, I've got this idea for an agenda item, or can we please have this material provided, is to send an email to the staff member. I think at this point that person is, and until further notice, I would say an email to her as a receptacle to bring to the chair, to put in order for the agenda, get the materials in advance of the next meetings. I think that's the mechanism to do it. And it's not to overcomplicate things, but rather to keep other discussions from becoming a sideshow that detracts from the focus of this committee, which is challenge enough in my experience. So if that's acceptable to the committee members, I would suggest, because of the interesting way that open meetings law is drafted for state public bodies, think of emailing the administrative hub for the committee for all of your needs between meetings. And then once you're at the meeting, you've got the assurance of public notice and all of your committee members to discuss in the transparent way that the law is intending. So that's one bit. You'll note on your agenda also at 2.3, designation of posting public notice of committee meetings. This is important because the essential purpose of the meeting is to make sure that the public can attend, whether it's virtual or in person. Madam Chair suggested using the Adams 14 board doc, or basically shadowing the way that Adams 14 posts. And I think as long as it's the official decision of this committee to use that, any other ways to disseminate the committee information and information about its meetings, I think is a great courtesy and a bonus, but legally there has to be a designated place. So I would encourage the committee to make an official discussion and vote on that particular point.
Do you guys mind doing that now since we're running short on time? Or I would like to move that we use Word docs as the official designation for posting notices.
Same as Adams 14.
Yes.
So it'd be Adams 14 Word docs,
Yes.
which do we have access to? Or do we need it?
You'll have access to the public. I don't think we can we grant access to committee members for executive content or anything like that, or no?
I'll have to check.
Okay.
This would just be for meeting notice, where to post this actual notice of the
Then
meeting
yes.
start date location.
Okay.
So I'll second.
On favor, really quick, I don't think we have to do roll call for that.
Aye.
And I know there was a question about how you disseminate that in your separate districts. I think it's totally up to you, but I just wanted to make sure there was nothing required in law that had to
Madam
be done.
Chair, I can send the link
Yes.
to
I can send the link to the other secretaries and they
Awesome.
can maybe post it somewhere on their website.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you.
So, if
it's not controversial, do you mind having just a vote so we can
Oh, yeah.
rule it, or whatever the case may be?
All in favor for Adams 14 Board Docs as the official designation for posting meetings? Unanimous?
And we are running out of time, but can I just hit on a couple things? Especially for those of you who are new to a public board, just a reminder that, as so well emphasized by your committee members today, everything is public. If you're looking at emails concerning committee business, using your cell phone for committee business, just assume that every communication you have, regardless of form, if it's electronic, hard copy, whatever, is going to be a public document. There are exceptions. You'll note that on my memo, I noted it as not for public dissemination because it is privileged attorney-client advice. It looks like some of the financial information that you may be seeking may also be confidential, but we'll get there later. But for all intents and purposes, your selection, appointment to this committee is for the benefit of the public. You're acting on behalf of the public and in their interest and not any individual interest. Because you are appointed members of this committee, just please be aware of any financial interest that you might have in any of the decisions here. For example, if you're using a facilitator that you own or something like that, just be aware of things like that. I'm not sure how else it might come up for you all, but do be aware that there is a specific code of conduct for that. And then what also might be a surprise for folks who have not been in public life is the Open Records Act. So not only are you watching emails to other committee members that may constitute a meeting, just assume that everything you write that has to do with committee business is public. If you're using your personal email, there may come a time where we have to ask you to search that email account for committee business. That's how the law works. People are entitled to records kept by public bodies. So if you have any questions about that, I'm happy to get into that in whatever detail would be useful, but just a few rules of thumb. And that should pretty much do it.
Will that presentation that you worked off of and posted be available to the committee?
I'd be happy to do that.
Okay.
Why don't I just work with your staff to see how that would be feasible? But I do think in the interest of informed decision making, identifying the mechanism to get materials to you all in advance is definitely underway, including the minutes as you refer to and other materials.
All right, Jamal, thank you so much for spending 2 hours of your time in the middle of the day with us. We'll be following up with the two motions.
Thanks, Ms. Lovato. I guess just in the convenience of this setting, part of what's been on my mind after making my motion, and I think what I'm going to say next is within the scope of the motion in terms of legal liabilities. But I'll be directing our CFO, and while Charlotte and Carla and Terry are here, I just would encourage all of us as part of those legal liabilities to talk about our unfunded para liabilities and share that. I'm mindful about the Tri-County Public Department of Health dissolution and the controversy about who's going to be responsible for accrued para liabilities. I think that's an important part of the financial picture that we all need to share per that motion.
Good reminder.
Yeah, really quickly, and I apologize. I don't know about the various communities, but I know in ours we have a very high Spanish-speaking population. And I wanted to propose that, again, we have the resources and the staff, if we could invite an interpreter next time, just to be sure that we have that information available. Okay, awesome. All right, that's it. We're adjourned. I don't think we have to do the motion and all the stuff that we have to do in regular bodies, but thank you guys again for coming, and we'll follow up soon about the next steps.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a nice weekend.
I'm ready to go to bed. At least my sweating.